says, how do we move security forces along and away from the toxic culture of anyone who speaks up about problems or is perceived as the problem?
The roots of toxicity can start anywhere. The roots of toxicity can be vested in a club that you go to before or after work. The roots of toxicity can be vested inside your own family. The roots of toxicity can be in an organization such as us or maintenance. And when you look at between us, maintenance, civil engineering, and things along those lines, we are enormous career fields. We are enormous career fields. And with that being said, means that you've got volume and people and large organizations. Leadership is a human experience. Toxicity is a human experience. Toxicity is the cancer that we allow to exist. If we are surrounded by toxic people and we say nothing, if we allow our friends to get berated in a disrespectful way, if we're going to let somebody make a joke that is far from a joke, but actually goes to where somebody's from, their background, their economic status, and all of those things, then we as human beings are allowing the toxicity to exist, because anywhere along the way, we can throw out our hand and say, stop. That's the challenge, because it's two-sided. One side is, as people, we have to own whether we accept toxicity or not, and not pass it along to the organization and say, well, this isn't a dang thing we can do about it because the organization's this way. It means you're giving in. And you can look at all sorts of points throughout history where people threw up their arms and gave in and said, well, I guess this just is the way things are. But you've got to have the courage to take a stand. Now, I also acknowledge, from a leadership side and a person side, courage is tough, because it's easy to have courage when there's nobody around you, or you're not in front of the court of public opinion, or you're not being exposed to social media. Courage is easier in that aspect. But when we take a stand to do the right thing in front of everybody, there is just a recognition that there is going to be some emotional strings that are going to get pulled, and some punches are going to get thrown as a result of that. And it's having the courage to know that you're doing the right thing. Now, let me go to leadership. From a leadership standpoint, from the upper levels all the way down to the frontline supervisor, from the highest of levels, as leaders, we have a responsibility to establish, what does right look like? What does a culture look like? And I think all of us can say at some point in time, we've been in a squadron where there was a huge wall between two parts of the squadron, where one part of the squadron couldn't stand the other part of the squadron. And they literally would do things purposefully to make that other part look bad, whether it was flights, whether it was back office versus those that are working flight, whether it was K9 versus, there's a whole slew we can go down the line. But I mean, I was in a squadron like that as a squadron commander. And there was a wall between two parts of that squadron, and they literally couldn't stand to be in the same room with each other. Myself and my chief sat down and said, this is what this squadron needs to be. And we went up and we said, these are our red lines. This is not tolerated. And the first thing that's not tolerated is you cannot tolerate us versus them. We are a family. So as leaders, you have to publicly establish, this is what we will not accept in this squadron. And then you have to make sure that your subordinate leadership all the way down is carrying that message, from the officers to our chiefs, to our company grade officers, to our senior NCOs, all the way down to the flight lieutenant, to the frontline supervisor. And the reason being is that anywhere along the way, if that chain breaks and somewhere the ops officer or the flight lieutenant or the flight chief or whatnot says, don't listen to that, it's a bunch of crap. At that point in time, you've got to have the courage as leadership to say, it's time to remove the toxic leader. And it's hard for us because we feel like we're hurting somebody's feelings. Oh, we're ruining their career. We're doing this and that. But you have to think of all of the people down the line that are subject to that toxicity, that you're worried about one individual who doesn't care about everybody else. And yet we're worried about that ruining that one person's career when they were the ones that set themselves down the course of their own self-destruction. And they're taking a lot of amazing airmen with them. That courage from the top all the way down, but as human beings from the bottom up, we as human beings have to recognize, listen, we own our own toxicity and we can't pass it off on somebody else and blame it on them for not being better about it. So that was kind of a long way around onto the question, but I feel very strongly about this. And I also think that we as a career field, now big picture, from the Pentagon to the MAGCOMs to the NAFs and all of the above, we have to be on a common belief that we are simply amazing, that we do tough work, that our people are asked to do amazingly difficult things. And what we have to do is we have to be able to say, hey, we see you and we understand that things are challenging. And there's a reason why we're asking you to do this tough thing. Because the thing, we can't necessarily make the job easier. Because what we do is difficult and what we do is important. But if we just have a little bit of mutual respect and maybe explain the why and sit down and kind of talk about like, hey, this is why we're asking you to do this and this is why you're important. It means that when we are in the midst of the firefight, when we are in the midst of a generation, when we are in the midst of something difficult, an inspection or whatnot, or no kidding, we are finding ourselves in an incredibly challenging environment, that then when we ask our people, hey, I need you to do this, and I don't have time to tell you why, you invested up front to at least build that sense of trust up front when things weren't quite as stressful. And that means that what you're doing is you're building that trust on the line when you got to ask them to do something tough. And the challenge with this is that these are human issues. These are human issues. So that it was a tough question. I hope I could at least share with you what's on my heart and what I believe about that.
Tough question? Tough question? Yeah. Yo, I'm about to get off the screen and run through this friggin' brick wall right now. God dang, sir. Yo, no. Did you see the comments that people put in the chat that Pete put up? Man, you about to have Sunday service up in here on leadership and toxicity. Good Lord have mercy.